Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. It comes from a bestseller by a Stanford professor. The book was rated by the Los Angeles Times as the most exciting theory that subverts the whole world. The Wall Street Journal called it lively and conveyed the depths of human nature. The book discussed whether humans have free will. Can your thinking and your ideas be controlled? Do you really make the decisions you make? Can you control your behavior? Do you really like the food you like to eat, the movies you like to watch, and the music you like to listen to? According to Professor Stan's theory, we humans do not have real free will. Why is that? This video may be a bit confusing. If you are interested in this topic, you can discuss your views. Before the story begins, let's talk about a very interesting experimental study. The title of the study is What Factors Are Related to Prisoners Getting Parole? If you are a judge, what criteria would you use to measure whether a prisoner meets the parole criteria? Good attitude? Good performance in prison? Have you worked hard on the stewing machine? Have you made a big bowl of noodles for everyone? The results of the experiment show that although these conditions seem to be plus points, in fact, the judge's decision on whether to grant parole is actually related to whether they are hungry or not. Studies have shown that after breakfast and lunch, judges are more inclined to approve parole applications at meal times. And as time goes by, as they get hungrier, especially in the hour before mealtime, the possibility of judges approving parole drops sharply, sometimes almost to zero. What does this tell us? This tells us that if we want to ask someone to do something, it is a really good sign to invite him to dinner. This story tells us that when we talk about free will, if even professors like judges are controlled by hunger when making decisions, then our choices not as free as we think? Are there many invisible or habitual ignored factors behind each of our behaviors? How much of the so-called free will is really free? According to the theory of Stanford professor Robert Spaxy, the proportion of human freedom is zero. Let me first briefly introduce Professor Robert. He is an outstanding American neurodocrinologist, neuroscientist, biologist, and psychologist. It is not an ordinary person who can teach us at Stanford. Let's not listen to Robert, who is very high profile. His books are actually very interesting. For example, he wrote a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Uyghurs in 1994. This book compares humans and zebras. Why do humans get oral ulcers and stomach ulcers, but zebras don't? Is this a research angle that normal people can think of? Then such a detached professor published a new book last year, Determinism, Life Science Without Free Will. This book was on the New York Times bestseller list as soon as it was published. Next, let's talk about why Professor Robert believes that we humans can't actually control our own behavior. Let's start with the term that everyone has heard of. What is hormone code? Hormones. Why do we feel hungry? Why? Why do we have mood swings? Why do we have sexual impulses? Why do we feel that we love someone? All of this is actually the effort of hormones. As we just said, research shows that judges are more likely to reject prisoners' parole requests when they are hungry. In daily life, have you ever experienced that people who are losing weight usually becomes irritable? This is actually scientifically based. In a state of hypoglycemia, the part of the brain that controls impulses will not work properly. So we will become more emotional and more difficult to control ourselves. This phenomena shows that our decisions are often not dominated by reason, but are affected by various biological factors. So the question is, although my hunger state is determined by my hormones, what do I decide to eat for this meal? Braised chicken or skewers? This choice is always made by me, right? Robert said, no, even this choice is not made by you. There are complex biological and cultural factors behind this. Your upbringing, the advertisements you're promoted to, and even the merchants, whether you are given a red envelope will affect the result. It sounds very sustainable. First, Let's explain it from the more scientific statement in the book. Let me ask you a question first. Have you ever thought about why we are born in our current family? Is this something we can control? You were born in China, India, or are you a British prince? It is said that reincarnation is a technical job, but we don't know how to reincarnate. At the moment of reincarnation in our second brain of life determined. What does this show? This shows that from the moment we landed on this earth, we are determined by some uncontrollable biological factors. Back to the 10th month when our children were in the mother's belly, there's no doubt that we have no free will in this 10th month. The external environment mother will affect everything about us. The simplest thing is that our stay or departure is determined by our mother. If the mother eats well, we are nutritious. If she eats poorly, we will be stunted and even have lifelong health problems. If the mother creates stress hormones for some reason during pregnancy, the probability of the future suffering from depression in adulthood will increase significantly. This everything is beyond our control. We have no free will over it. Then comes our childhood. Everyone should agree that childhood is a great impact on a person. In psychology, most of the treatments are related to returning to childhood, discovering the source of the problem, and solving the shadow of childhood. Let's take the example just now. Born in China, born in India, and born as a prince. These three childhoods cannot be the same. Being in different environments and having parents with different personalities. All of this is beyond our control. If the childhood is different, the personalities and the behaviors of adults will also be affected. Robert said that there is a special term in neurology and biology, epigenetics. It means that each of us has different childhood experiences that will change the way genes are expressed. Although gene DNA cannot be changed, genes have switches, and not every gene will be exposed. So life experiences, especially early life experiences, can turn on or off our original DNA to affect a person's behavior. Let's take a simple example. For example, some mothers will give their children more care. For example, when the child cries, the mother hugs and comforts her as soon as possible. How will this part of material love affect the children? Scientists did an experiment to compare two groups of mothers. The first group of mothers was more careful. They would often comb the baby's hair, hold the baby, have more physical contact, let the baby stay with them more, and respond immediately when the baby makes a sad sound or cry. The other group of mothers is more inclined to deal with it differently. He believes that it is no better to let the baby deal with these emotions by himself. If he cries, he'll keep crying, and he will stop crying when he is tired. Here, we will not state which of these two methods is right or wrong. After all, more than infants, both methods are very popular in education. Let's only discuss here why this behavior of mother will affect the children's future behavior. Professor Robert said, the studies have shown that mothers who show more caring actions will cause epigenetic changes in their children's brains. The switch of the AKA gene is turned off, and the stress hormones of the children will decrease when they grow up. On the contrary, a mother who treats her children coldly will turn on the switch of the stress hormone of her children. When these two children have different levels of stress hormones, they will definitely behave differently in life. If you praise someone for being very relaxed, it is because he decided to show a sense of relaxation? Not really. Even once the switch of stress hormone is turned on, this thing can be passed on to the next generation. The stress hormone here is just a very simple example. Except for very few lucky people who have a 100% happy childhood, more people have some shadows to a greater or lesser extent. In the field of psychology, there's a test to detect how much stress or trauma the child has experienced before the age of 18, which is called the ACE score. Lucky people may get 0 points, and relatively unfortunate people may get 10 points. We can test ourselves now. I'll say 10 small items. If you have experienced this item in your childhood, then add 1 point. The accumulated score is your ACE score. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, substance abuse in the family, mental illness in the family, domestic violence against the mother, divorce, family in prison. The higher the ACE score, the greater the likelihood of depression and early death. But this ACE score is not something we can control. These external factors ultimately determine a person's development. So is your decision really your decision? Comes from your genome, your childhood, and your parents. Our uncontrollable early events can cause the opening or closing of genes, thereby changing our behavior in the second half of our lives. Have you heard of a very famous experiment in which a neuroscientist, James Farrell, was studying the brains of murderers and accidentally discovered that their prefrontal cortex showed different activity patterns from ordinary people? The prefrontal cortex is the area where people make decisions and social behaviors. James also found that the brain activity patterns of murderers usually indicate that they have antisocial personality disorder. He also found a DNA related to aggression and violence. A variant called the MOA gene, or the warrior gene. Most murderers have warrior genes and special activities in the anterior cortex. However, the most shocking thing is that Dr. James accidentally discovered that he also had such activities during the brain scan, and that there was also a Moana warrior gene in his DNA. Why did the same genetic components make one a scientist and the other a murderer? Everyone conducted a considerably investigation and finally found that this was related to the gene switch and ACE score we just mentioned. When a person is abused in childhood, if he already has moral operation, then the operation will be turned on. And if you're lucky in your childhood and your ACE score is 0, then even if this person has a positive experience, he will not become a murderer. This once again proves that our seemingly free will and our spontaneous actions actually have reasons. Isn't this causality? Every action has a previous cause. If we trace this causal chain all the way back, we are returned to our original starting point, such as the Big Bang. Physicists like to discuss these things very much because they fundamentally reveal the basic workings of our universe. In the frameworks of causality, all events can be traced back. This means that in theory, if we can trace back, we can speculate, and we can predict every detail of the future. However, in reality, we find that things are not so simple and we cannot easily infer the future. So this leads to chaos theory. Chaos theory tells us that even a very small change in the initial conditions of a system can lead to completely different results. This phenomena is often called the butterfly effect. For example, a butterfly flapping its wings gently in Brazil may cause a hurricane in the United States. So what does it have to do with free will? Chaos theory shows that even if we know the initial state of a system accurately, we cannot accurately predict its future state, because every small change can be amplified to an unpredictable degree. This means that our behavior is not completely predictable even in physics. It cannot be predicted, which gives us a sense of freedom. However, is this feeling of freedom enough to make us believe in our free will? The answer to this question is actually not that simple. Some people think that uncertainty of the future makes us feel free because we cannot predict our own behavior. But this feeling, the feeling of freedom, may actually be an illusion. Physics tells us that all events are affected by previous events, and even in chaotic systems, all changes have reasons, but we just don't know what these reasons are. Therefore, the real question is whether we can find behaviors that are completely unaffected by any previous conditions. Well, this is an impossible within the current scientific frameworks. Everything that happens is because of some previous cause that leads to the current results. And then the current results will become a new cause that leads to the future result. Going back to the question we talked about earlier, I understand the genetic direction, but I can't say that I don't even know. In the end, there is no choice between eating braised chicken or eating skewers, right? This is what we call the authenticity of feelings. There are some experiences in daily life that makes us feel that we can control everything, decide what to eat for breakfast, and decide our career path. We know that we consciously make this decision, and we also know what impact will this have on us. But we have to think about how you can become a person with such intentions. That is because everything that happened in the previous second, the previous day, the previous year, in the first half of our life will make you make a decision at the moment. So back to the starting point. We have no free will in this state. So humans have no free will. Speaking of this, it is very scary. This view subverts our two existing systems. Let's talk about the first point. After Professor Robert published his book, he received strong opposition from many people, including some colleagues from Stanford. Everyone thought that his view had a very terrible moral paradox. I don't know if you have realized this. That is, if everything we do is not determined by what happened before, we don't have free will. So can criminals get away with it through his theory? It's not that I want to do this. It's determined by my genes and my childhood. So I kill people, set fires, and rob banks. But from a social perspective, the concept of free will is what shapes our laws and morals. We establish a system by believing that people are free and choose these behaviors to reward good behaviors and punish bad behaviors. So if people don't have free will, how can we rationalize these systems? Can we punish a person for the crimes he committed because of his childhood and previous living environments? If we recognize free will, should we adjust the entire legal system in our view of the world? Simply put, how do we define success and failure? We usually think that successful people rely on intelligence and hard work. Then, what about favorable environments, wealthy parents, the opportunities for life? If people don't have free will, it means there is no fairness and no social system. Then what are we? This leads to the second terrifying point of this theory. This is completely my own imagination. Robert didn't mention this in his book. If you think what I said is wrong, you can refute me. If you hear this, you seem to be convinced by Robert. Humans don't have free will. There are too many invisible factors behind our behavior, and these factors often work without our knowledge. So are we just machines driven by these biological and environmental factors? If we are machines, what does that mean? It means that we live in a virtual world. In this framework, our behavior and consciousness are just the product of some complex program. The reality we perceive is just a virtual environment in a computer simulation. These invisible biological and environmental factors are just a small part of the parameters in this virtual environment, which determines our behavior patterns and decision-making process. Then what we call self-will is also a part of this program. He gave us an illusion of self-awareness and made us believe that we are autonomous individuals. Isn't it very scary to think about it? A very scary future. I have a theory that all old fans know. That is the virtual world nesting doll theory. That is, the world we live in is just a product of the projections of high-dimensional space. And the AI we created, sooner or later, their society will be formed. Then, one layer after another, one dimension creates a world. The virtual world nesting doll theory has gone a bit far. Let's get back to the topic. Although we may not have a free will, and although what we do now is determined by what happened before, does it mean that we can't become a better self? Don't forget that a switch Robert experienced can be passed on to the next generation. Then, can we shape the next generation to turn off their bad genes as much as possible and turn on their good genes as much as possible? Can we find a more friendly way in the virtual world we have created? That is, seeing all the sufferings in the world, I still love this world. Okay, that's all for today. Do you like this type of video? Or do you think the video is too science fiction? Then read them. Thank you for watching. See you next time.